Well, Popey, here's the deal. It's the day that we knew was coming, and everybody associated with the Ontario Hockey League knew was coming. But this might surprise you. So one more time for our fans of the Ontario Hockey League, I got a bit of a rant about what we just learned about the league this week.
Why am I not shocked?
Well, my soapbox goes with me everywhere I go. So even if we're not in the rink, my soapbox is right at my side for whenever I want to step onto it. And boy, am I ready to step onto it.
Listen, everything that you're going to rant about, I'm sure I'm going to rant about because,
Really?
well, I don't know. That's maybe a lie, but I'm just infuriated by this entire process. And I don't know whether I'm infuriated. My anger is because I'm not watching hockey. I don't know if it has something to do with a lost paycheck. I don't know whether it has to do with over 365 days of this pandemic, and I don't know whether it's directed towards the OHL or the provincial government or who to direct my anger towards. But I'm kind of upset about the whole process.
Yeah, I think, and I've given a lot of thought to the blame game as well. And I would suggest to anyone, quite frankly, take it for what it's worth. It's free advice, but I would suggest that if you want to direct your anger at somebody or something, direct your anger at the provincial government in Ontario. Because when you watch the Western Hockey League figure something out, when you watch the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League figure something out, really the crux of all of this for the Ontario Hockey League is the province in which it conducts its business. And to say that the Ontario government has been a disaster at handling this would be an understatement. It's as though Ontario Premier Doug Ford and his caucus have been wearing a goalie's trapper on either hand. We call some decisions ham-handed. These are trapper-handed decisions they've made from day one. And that's, I think if you're looking for blame, that's where you should direct your blame.
If that were the case, they would have at least caught some of these problems that they ran into. But they haven't. When we talk about COVID and when we talk about the OHL season, because I said that anger and I talked to you about it on your show. Why come out and say that you had a deal after the fact you had a deal when you can't now announce it? It's like, well, we did have one, but now they're blaming this whole thing on COVID again. And that's not the case. The the provincial government, I don't think ever wanted the OHL to have a season. You think back at the very start of this, when was it Lisa McLeod that tweeted that in order to get back playing, they'll have to do so without body contact. That shocked everyone. And then Ford comes out and goes against her and says, we're working with the league to try to find a safe play program. They never wanted this league to get back up and running. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they knew they would have had to pony up money, which they still did. But it's an absolute travesty that the provincial government of Ontario could not figure something out with the Premier League in the CHL and the Premier Development League. Now we'll have to talk about how this is going to affect not only the hockey career and the overall career of these young hockey players, but the mental health of it, the physical health of it. It is just, they took that ball and held it above their head and didn't just drop it. They chucked it. This was a complete and utter failure, a black eye on the league and a black eye on this provincial government. It is absolutely terrible.
See, now I don't know, and this connects into what I want to get on my soapbox about here for just a second, but I'm not sure I'd ever say that the provincial government didn't want the league to figure out a return to play. I just don't think it was anywhere near high enough on the priority list when it began trying to react to a pandemic that 13 months later, it is still reacting to instead of being proactive. Like, it's just been beaten down by this. And every time it tries to get up off the canvas, bam, it gets hit again because it's made so many trapper-handed decisions all the way through. So I don't know if it's a question of want. I just don't think it was something even on the provincial government's radar.
And that's maybe where I think we're on the same avenue, just maybe not using the same verbiage, because I don't think they wanted them to, because they're just like, you guys are garbage, like forget about you, not garbage. We're just forgetting about you. We have bigger things to worry about. And then by the time it came back around, it was a little too late. I think Lisa McLeod coming out and tweeting that at the very start says enough about this whole process than you need to know, because without even talking with David Branch, without even listening to a plan, without talking, obviously, about a plan with Doug Ford, she's going to tweet that they can't have body contact. Like, oh, hey, look at me, I'm doing my job. No, you're not. You're being a hindrance to this whole process is what you're doing. And this is why we sit here on April 21st with a canceled OHL season. Meanwhile, NCAA up and running, pro hockey over in Europe up and running, WHL, QMJHL all up and running. It's a joke.
What do you think of her tweets, Minister McLeod's tweets, many months after the no body checking tweet about her being at her own kids' minor hockey games? Feels good to be back in a rink watching the kids get their exercise and their mental health, attention paid to their mental health. Meanwhile, fans of the Ontario Hockey League, the players and the families are going, hello, what about us over here? Because she was, I don't think it was deliberate shade. I think it was just foolishness.
Yeah, are you shocked by that? Like, I mean,
no, not the way we've seen this go.
She's completely mishandled this entire situation.
So you mentioned before, and you make a good point about all of the other leagues, NCAA included, that have figured out something, managed the risks, and kept players safe through their returns to play. But you mentioned earlier black eye for the league, and this is what I want to get on my soapbox about a little bit here. And call me biased. I've been covering this league for a while. I'm a huge fan of this league, but I don't look at this as a black eye for the Ontario Hockey League at all. Does it suck for the Ontario Hockey League and the players that compete in it? Absolutely. But I do know where the narrative started. It started where all the bad narratives start, and that is on social media. But somebody's hot take was that this is the black eye for the Ontario Hockey League, and it makes the NCAA look that much more attractive to players weighing their options between the two leagues. And nothing, absolutely nothing could be further from the truth. Again, does this suck in the biggest way of suckage? Absolutely it does. The Memorial Cup being canceled for back-to-back years, it's horrible. But a black eye or making the NCAA more attractive, you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater. If that's your hot take, it's a stupid take is what it is. This league is going to be back next season or later this year with a 2021-2022 campaign. It's going to be, if not right on 68 games, very close to it. And life is going to go on for the Ontario Hockey League. You already talked about it being the premier league within the 3 Canadian Hockey League entities, which it is. And nobody's looking more closely at the NCAA because they managed to play a couple of dozen games this year. Nobody thinks, oh, the NCAA is now the best development league for my son because they managed to play during COVID. Shut up. It's a stupid argument. Take it back. That's all.
I'm with you. I don't think it is a black eye on this league. I think you're the only league that couldn't get up and running.
But it's not the league's fault. I'm completely allowing the league to be off the hook on this. I really am.
I'm not. It takes two to party. And if they both hold some blame.
How does the league hold any blame in this? Honestly, like, tell me how they screwed up.
What kind of, okay, simple enough.
Sure.
And this is maybe goes back to something else we talk about repeatedly on this podcast. But what did we hear? We interviewed David Branch.
Yep.
What did we hear about the criteria that the provincial government had laid out for them? Nothing. What did we hear about? Oh, that we've issued this plan. Did we hear in December or January, we've issued a plan to the provincial government? Nope. We've issued our 3rd plan to the provincial government. We've issued our 7th plan to Lisa McLeod, and she keeps saying no. There's got, if it's that type of negotiation, which I expect it was, there has to be some form of transparency there. I'm holding both parties accountable because you didn't come to a deal while everyone else did. I know it's then if Lisa McLeod and the provincial government were that boneheaded enough, I guess, to have a plan that was unable to be met, then you got to come out and say this plan is unable to be met, because now both people look bad.
But what you're overlooking in that, Chris, is the political side to all of it. Like the provincial government's failure in this notwithstanding, David Branch is nobody's fool. He's not going to poop in his own backyard. I guarantee you there were multiple plans presented to the provincial government for a return to play. I guarantee it. But it doesn't serve David Branch or the Ontario Hockey League in any way whatsoever to make public that they've been trying and the province continues to kick them to the curb, because that's not going to keep the relationship in good enough shape so that when the plan is ultimately arrived at, somebody is still listening on the other end. It's like unions. They never negotiate in public. You hear little snippets back and forth, but when it comes right down to the deals that are getting done, nobody has any idea what's going on at that table. So I think it would be in the OHL's worst interest. They'd be shooting themselves in the skate if they started blabbing about the 7 plans they presented that never got off the ground.
What would have happened?
Then you've got a provincial government that's struggling already, and they're gonna listen to you less. They're going to be less receptive to any idea you present to them, not just now, but in the future.
Season got canceled. It doesn't matter.
I guess now we know that, but they were still
no
trying.
Worse could have came up. I know there were, and trust me, it's like a 90% provincial government with me, 10% league. Fair but when enough. 2 people are at the table and you can't come to an agreement, you can't solely put the blame on one. It is a 2-person negotiation. And I wish I knew more about the negotiation, because I would love to put 100% blame on this provincial government. I got lots to say about them lately. Don't get me started. But I just think when you both people come to the table and you can't get a deal done, then both hold some blame. Yeah. So it is a black eye on the league, because Tom and Joe down having a coffee outside before this lockdown were like, why isn't the OHL playing? Why isn't the OHL playing? Not as many people are maybe as involved in knowing what's going on with the league as you and I, because it is our job. So they're just looking at it. The OHL is not back up and running. Oh, the OHL couldn't figure out. They don't know that Lisa McLeod is holding ransom because for whatever reason, they don't know these things. So I do think it is a black eye on the league. Is it going to make the NCAA a more viable option if for someone's child, if they want them to play pro hockey? No, not even close. Like, that argument is over. I said it on your show the other day. The OHL may, the NCAA may come up a couple notches next year if the OHL doesn't come out and say, we have a plan way early. You got 5 months before puck drop, almost to the day, September 21st. Isn't that when we normally drop the puck? Roughly?
Third Friday of the month, usually.
Okay. Yeah. So you have 5 months. You got to come out early and say, here is our plan for September. Otherwise, a lot of parents with those kids are going to start wondering, maybe the OHL isn't the way. Maybe, NCAA, they've had a plan last year to figure it out. Maybe we'll go down here. So as long as the OHL has their ducks in a row and a plan for September and doesn't wait till September 13th to say, here's our plan, then they'll be fine.
Yeah. But see, it's not up to the league to tell us what their plan is. It's up to the league to tell the government what the plan is. And so I'm really confident, although I would have thought we'd be playing a 30 or 40 game schedule this year. It's still bizarre to me. Before we get to our guest, who's got so many great stories, we really just need to get out of the way and let him start telling them. Yes, there's a story that involves Wayne Gretzky, who was not the most interesting person at a dinner in LA. Let that stew for just a minute. But before we get to the guest, Poker, just real quick, one final thought from you on the schmoz that it's been here in the OHL. But what would you rather have? A league that never really got off the ground and you don't know why, or a league like the Dub that canceled its playoffs, or the Q that started and stopped and started and stopped, and who the hell knows what's going on over there?
The other 2 leagues, for sure. Without a doubt. No questions asked. Right. You got hockey under your belt. You played some games. A lot of these players, I saw somebody tweet about it. I can't remember who it was, and I apologize. They were talking about guys like Sean Dursey, who come into the overage year or their third or 4th year in the league, who are ranked about 50th, but they have such a great season. They get bumped up to 20th and they end up getting drafted at a high level. People are losing out on that opportunity. People are losing a ton of opportunity for these young kids. And even if it was a 15 games, there's still a mini season, you could say.
Yeah. I don't know that it matters enough for this length of schedule that other league played to really vault somebody's draft status in this crazy COVID year.
Do you know what it does?
Plus we've still been in. Do
you know what it does though? On a different level, players wrote a letter to the league and to the provincial government. Players' parents wrote a letter to the league and the provincial government. If they would have had any kind of season, those people would have felt valued and heard, but they don't right now. And that is the black eye on the league.
That's a great point. And I'll give you that one. Okay. We do have a tremendous guest on the podcast this week. We even get into the fights or lack thereof, which means he's probably never had a black eye in the Ontario Hockey League, but you're always good at introducing the guests, Popey. So let's hear it.
Well, I grew up hating this guy.
That's the best way to start. I hate this guy.
No, now he's great. There aren't too many people around the hockey world, Mike, that any player walks into a media room and sees that person and has authentic joy that they are now seeing this person. That is the biggest compliment I think you can give to any former player, and especially a goaltender like this guy. Former Kitchener Ranger, played in the most famous Memorial Cup of all time, went on to play professional hockey into the NHL and then overseas. Just an absolute beauty of a human being. What's the point of us talking? Let's pass the torch to Mike Torchia.
Well, Torch, I got to say, after spending about 5 years with you broadcasting games for Rogers TV, I got to know firsthand just how many stories you have, or stories connected to stories. So this one, we've been looking forward. We'd have it circled on the calendar to get you on this podcast, buddy. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. You too, Poper. I know I don't say that too often, but hey, you know what? I'm excited to do this. I've been looking forward to it ever since I got the call. So I know you and I discussed this before, so it's good to get on here.
Are you happier now, Torch, not working with Farwell, or coming to all the free hockey games working with Farwell?
You know what? It's 6 of one, half dozen of another. It kind of balances itself out. I'll tell you, I got a guy at work who I work with now, and he says his favorite thing is listening to Farwell at night because it's a repeat of his afternoon show. And do you know why he loves listening to him? Because it puts him to sleep every night.
Don't ever change, Torch. Okay, let's go.
I would just be laying in bed, my blood boiling.
Yeah, you would. That's right.
I said, who falls asleep to Farwell? I said, there's a couple of games in Mississauga I almost did, but other than that, there was no one there.
Well, and then there were those bus trips, Torchy, where we had to squeeze into those seats, and you could snore with the best of them, even on the bus sometimes.
Oh, you know what? I have no trouble sleeping. COVID's been good for that too. I've caught up on a lot of sleep during COVID.
we ask Farwell a question on this to start things off. Who snores louder, me or Torch?
Oh boy.
Well,
let me tell you a story.
I can let him go.
As an answer to the question. Yes, both of you as roommates, if we're going to draw back the curtain on this, have been known to snore on occasion. But I remember the story from, I believe it was Andrew, your youngest, Torch, that asked you the question, what's going to happen when you share a hotel room with Farwell because of your snoring? How's he going to sleep?
Well, let's put it this way. When we go on hockey tournaments now, we always look for the hotel room that has 2 rooms with a separating door so he can sleep to get ready for games.
That's hilarious. Okay. I know there's so much ground to cover with you, Torch, but I wanted to kind of go back to the real roots of this for you as a hockey goaltender, because if I'm not mistaken, your father was a pretty accomplished soccer player. So how does a kid from a kind of soccer family end up in hockey?
You know what? My dad never put on a pair of skates in his life. Still to this day, he's never put on a pair of skates. He grew up, before he came over from Italy, he played second division pro over there, and then hurt his back before moving over here. So, you know what? I grew up and still love soccer to this day. I grew up watching soccer like every weekend religiously. We'd watch all the Italian league games. The World Cups were always fun. Now I'm a big fan of the English Premiership. So you get a chance to spread your horizons there. But honestly, growing up in Toronto, I had my one cousin, Ralph, who lives in Cambridge now. He was playing hockey in Toronto. He was playing minor midget growing up. And I was like, I want to go watch some games. So we started going to watch some games. And my dad goes, you should try it. So I said, sure. So I started playing hockey and grew up in Toronto, right downtown by St. Mike's Arena in Toronto, like the old St. Mike's Arena, not where they played out of Mississauga, the old St. Mike's Arena, that little barn. That was the very first rink I skated on when I was 4 years old. And other than a little bit of a paint job, not much has changed in that rink, even to this day when I go in there. But what a great arena now. I love going in there and seeing the nostalgia of it all and seeing all the guys that came through there. And, I started going to watch him play, and then my other cousin was playing in Bramalea for the Bramalea Blues. So I really got into it watching junior like, I guess these guys were just finishing up their minor hockey. So they were a few years older than I, and they would be finishing up the minor midget portion and then going into junior B. And, it's funny because your paths kind of cross way after the fact, and you end up doing the same things. But the only reason I got into it is because my uncle convinced my dad that I should try hockey. So I did.
How'd you become a goalie?
By accident.
Don't we all?
It was basically one kid didn't show up one game. We were playing one of our select games. So we were playing house league for the Toronto Olympics. And, one kid doesn't show up one game. So they said, who wants to go in net? So, of course, I jump in there. Do pretty good. Get shut out my first game. So you're the new goalie. So that was basically how it started. And, it was such a great little organization down there. It's just a little Toronto Olympics organization out of St. Mike's Arena. And I'm sure if you talk to Kevin Weeks, he grew up in that same organization. So we were, I've known Kevin Weeks. Kevin Weeks played with my brother, my younger brother, and they grew up together in that organization. But just an unbelievable family there too. So, you get to meet so many people through hockey nowadays that the friendships last forever.
Do you remember sorry, Mike, do you remember your first, I'm going to goalie geek out here for a bit. Do you remember your first set of pads?
Oh God, they were given to me by the organization. They were old Coopers, and the gloves were absolutely horrendous. My chest protector was this piece of felt that you put on your arms, and it had a separate chest piece that was basically probably worse than the baseball chest protectors the catchers wear nowadays. It was not even near as good as one of those. And it was basically a chest protector with these pieces of felt over your arm. So there wasn't a lot of protection. So thankfully the equipment got a little better as I got older, because the bruises might have kept me from continuing to play goal.
Were you a TPS Louisville guy in Kitchener though? Or were you Vaughn the whole time?
I was a Brian's guy.
Brian's.
I wore Brian's all the time in Kitchener. So I wore Brian's every year. Well, they were Heaton's they were Brian's. They were still Brian's going in. And that was an interesting story there. One of the good friends of mine was working for Brian's from Toronto. And we had taught hockey school together coming up. And he was kind of the Westwood rink rat, but he was also doing some work for Brian's. And he goes, you got to try a set of these. Put them on, loved them. And then, from there, now I've worn almost everything under the sun. So it's been fun. I wish I had the pads they're wearing nowadays. I'll tell you that. A little lighter now than the deer-haired stuff ones I got stuck wearing.
I was going to say that before, with the evolution of the equipment, and you talked about even by the end of your career how much better it was. But could you imagine having, if you're coming into the game today, you're watching probably your son Nathan doing this very thing, but the equipment he's got compared to what you played with?
Well, we tested it out. So we put it on a scale so we took his pads that he's wearing now, and I took one pad that I wore back when I was playing before they came out with all the foam inserts, and both his pads were lighter than the one pad I wore. So that tells you how much improvement. And I think that may be the biggest factor, the improved equipment for goalies. And obviously goalies are way better athletes now than they were back then. They're considered, and I played with some freaks too along the way that were just unbelievable athletes. Olaf Kolzig might be one of the greatest guys and greatest athletes I played with as a goalie. But, the equipment right now enables you to be so much faster and so much more agile. Like I watch Nathan, he gets new chest protector, new pads, throws it on once, and he's wearing it in a game. I got a new pair of pads, and it took me 6 weeks of driving over it in the driveway to get them on so I could put them on and wear them in a game or soak them down or do anything you can to kind of break it down because they're so stiff. So, the equipment nowadays has come so far, and that's a huge, huge thing for these goalies nowadays.
By the third period, the pads would be so wet, it added about an extra 5 pounds.
It's wood.
Oh my God, that would be the last thing. Like, even we can talk about the Memorial Cup later, but I remember playing that. We played in I think it was the semifinal game against Laval, and we went into overtime there. But I think I had 44, 46 shot or 42 shots in that game. My equipment was still wet the next day when I came in, and we had fans blowing on my pads. And my pads, they were the last thing to want to dry.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just terrible. Like, it took so long to get your gear to dry back then that, it became a factor in some of those overtime games.
That Memorial Cup, that 1990 Memorial Cup, has already come up, I don't know, several times with previous guests on this podcast. Obviously something we will talk about with you, because many have said, and I subscribe to this, the best junior hockey championship this country has ever seen. But before that, I wanted to ask you about draft day, Torch. And I mean draft day to the Kitchener Rangers. Here's a kid from the Toronto area, comes up through the ranks as a goalie. You told the story about just the kid not showing up. You get a shutout your first game, boom, you're a goaltender. What's it like getting the call from the Kitchener Rangers? Not a foreign land, obviously, just an hour away, but still, you're leaving home to go to Kitchener to play hockey.
No, you know what? It was one of those things. It was back then. We didn't have the online draft, obviously, because there was no internet back then. But we were in the arena. I remember sitting in North York Centennial Arena, which has now been renamed Herb Carnegie Arena in North York. So it's great arena for it. The rink floor is down there, and there's stands all up down the one side. So we're all sitting up in the stands, and I had a bunch of my teammates who I'd played midget with that year, and one of my good friends, Drake Berhowski, who we've talked to on occasion. But we're all sitting in the stands waiting to get drafted, and I think that year we had 15 guys drafted off our midget team that year, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. We had such a good team, but we were sitting there, and you're just waiting for your name to be called. Thankfully, I didn't have to wait too long. It was funny because we had off our team that won the All Ontarios the year before in Bantam, we had the top defenseman went first overall in that draft, which was Drake Berhowski. So the top forward in that draft was Graydon Reed, who I believe went third to Owen Sound, and the top goalie was myself, who went to Kitchener, and I was 20th overall. So thankfully I didn't have to wait long, but I kind of had an inkling I would be in Kitchener. I had really good meetings with Kitchener prior to the draft. And the guy who was who really got me here to Kitchener was a guy by the name of Larry Stern, who went on to work with Octagon, with, I can't remember which agency he went on to work with, but he was a guy who was the head scout of the Kitchener Rangers, and he was supposed to be our assistant coach, but then he became the head scout of Kitchener. And I got to know Larry when I was probably in Pee Wee. And he goes, one day you're going to play for my Rangers. And I was like, hey, you draft me, I'll be there. And sure enough, it was kind of a dream matchup. But, so much credit to Larry Stern for getting me here. But once I got here, it was all Joe McDonnell. He was just unbelievable for me.
You mentioned Drake Berehowski. Young, obviously, you said one of your good friends still. What's he like?
You know what? Drake and I, it's so funny because when we were kids, I remember when we were just starting out, we were kids playing minor hockey together in Toronto. And we played together we started together in minor Pee Wee with Toronto Marlies. We started together there, and then we played minor Pee Wee. And then in Pee Wee, we had a guy by the name of Eric Lindros joined our team. And he joined our team that year. But Drake and I started together in minor hockey, and we really hit it off. Like Christmas Eve, part of our Christmas Eve tradition was going to Drake's house for their family open house, and all the friends and family of all their friends were over there. And it started in minor Pee Wee. I can't remember when it stopped. We were still doing it in junior. That was a Christmas Eve tradition. Head over to the Berehowskis, and we became very, very close. To the point where we would spend summers together. Funny story with him is before we went into junior, the summer before we went into junior, we find ice wherever we could. So we'd skate in Toronto and, get a phone call. He goes, Torch. I go, what? Of course, this was on the rotary phones because we didn't have cell phones back then. So I'm talking to my wall over there, and he goes, come on over to my house tonight, get your dad to drop you off, bring your gear. I'm like, sure. So sure enough, my dad drops me off at his place like 8 o'clock at night. His brother drives us over to Lakeshore Arena. I go, who are you skating with? He goes, one of my brother's friends. He plays for London. So sure enough, he goes, he's getting ready for NHL camp, so he needs a goalie to come take shots. So this was like our summer tradition. It was Brendan Shanahan, who was the guy from the London Knights. And I started skating with Brendan and Drake probably when we were 14, 15 years old. Brendan would just come out and he'd abuse us, but he was such a great guy, and such like he was a guy that we would sit there and he would sit and tell us stories. And I heard so many London Knight stories about the Jim Sprotts and all these other guys who played in London. And, it was a lot of fun to be around that. And that was kind of my tipping point when I knew I wanted to play in the OHL, just hearing some of that and, thinking about what it would be like to play. But the ability to come to Kitchener really, even back then, just kind of, it made it so worth it. And obviously I'm still here. I still call this place home. So I think I've lived here longer than I've ever lived in Toronto. So
You mentioned Joe McDonnell's name, and the two of you are forever linked from your time in Kitchener and well beyond. And as a former guest on this podcast, Joe told us a number of things. He told the story about being a former Ranger himself when he was stripped of the captaincy and it was given to Brian Bellows. Went on to a championship, didn't win the Memorial Cup, but won a championship with the team. Then got into coaching kind of by accident, didn't really think about being a coach, but somebody else mentioned it to him. He joins an assistant, moves on to be a head coach. And then when he talked about you, when he was on this podcast, Mike, he said that if it was something that was done back then, naming a goalie a captain, he would have named you his captain. That's how much you meant to the team. What was that relationship like between the two of you?
You know what? He was one of those coaches that it took me a while. Like when you come in here, like you're so young. I was 16 years old, like moving away from home. Come into a situation in Kitchener. My roommate was Chris LaPuma my first year, who I'd grown up playing minor hockey against with him with the Chicago Young Americans, and myself in Toronto. We kind of got to know each other, got to know the family and everything else. So him and I were a good fit together, living together. But when you come in here, you're 16 years old, you're moving away from home probably for the first time, and you come into a situation and you got a whole bunch of older guys. And I played with a lot of crazies here my first year in Kitchener, let me tell you. But you move away and you're so young and naive. You think the world's just going to crumble to your feet. Everything's just going to fall into place. But you really have to earn it, and you have to fight for your spot. And my first year, I remember my goalie partner had unbelievable year that year. Gus Morshauser, he might have been the goalie of the year, made the World Junior team that year. Had an unbelievable year for us in Kitchener. But we were sitting there, and it was probably a month into the season, and I don't think I'd played my first game yet. He'd been on such a streak, and we were way well overachieving that year. We weren't supposed to be as good as we were, and we were in first place and everything else. And I didn't get much ice time. And I remember walking into Joe's office and just saying, Joe, I go, this is hard. I go, I'm so used to playing all these games in Toronto. Growing up as a kid, I played up a year, and I was probably the go-to guy. I remember playing high school hockey. I was in grade 9, and all my teammates were able to go to the bar and drink, and I was barely 13, 14 years old, and we go up to Oshawa. But I was always used to being the go-to guy. And you come here, and reality kind of sets in. Gus, and no knock on Gus. Gus had an incredible year that year. But for me, I remember getting my first start, and we went into Belleville is where I got my first OHL start. And Joe goes, you're going to get your start here. Okay, so let's go have a good game. Go enjoy yourself. Well, sure enough, we go into Belleville, and I'm excited. I'm pumped up, getting ready, and I go out there for warm-ups, and we weren't 2 minutes into warm-ups. We got a brawl. We get into a brawl with the Belleville Bulls. So, and they had a tough team. Brian Marchment, Greg Bignall, Scott Thornton. They had a whole bunch of big boys. And I got 2 shots in warm-up. The brawl lasted the whole warm-up. I got 2 shots before my first game. And I've been playing in this Olympic-sized rink, and I'm just sitting there going, oh my God, I'm so not ready for this. So we end up losing that night. But, it was one of those things that I remember my first game because I sat at center ice, and the goalie for Belleville at the time was a guy by the name of Jeff Fife, who had a great junior career, had a really good run in Belleville. But I sat there at center ice, and he goes, "First start, eh?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Good luck." And he just kind of said, that was it. And we sat there and we talked at center ice while those brawls going on. Like Brian Marchment didn't even come on the ice for warm up. He was on the bench in his flip flops, grabbing guys over the boards. And needless to say, we had a tough team as well between, the Rick Lanes and Kirk Tomlinson, Robbie Sangster. We had Richard Borgo, Shane Stevenson, whole bunch of guys that could really throw them. And, the game's changed so much nowadays, but it sure made my first start memorable. But there weren't a lot of starts in my first couple of months in the league.
You mentioned Rick Elaine. We had a great story about Rick Elaine a few podcasts ago with the Parson brothers. And I'm assuming you would have been in net for that game. Do you remember? I don't know if you know the incident we're talking about where Rick basically came out of the penalty box after getting cross-checked in the face below the goal line, and Steve wouldn't get out of the box. Then he went in there and beat the crap out of him. Were you there? Do you remember that?
I was in net that game. So I can't remember if it was in Owen Sound or in Kitchener. But Rick, he just sat there. He came out of the box and he stood in front of their door waiting for him to come out. And Steve refused to come out of the box. And we were sat there and just looked, and we were laughing so hard. Now, Rick Elaine was a tough man, but here's my favorite. I'll give you my favorite Rick Elaine story. We were playing my second year, the year we went to the Memorial Cup. So we were playing London in Kitchener. And sitting there, and right before I have 10 starts in a row after Joe sat me out. So they went on a northern trip, Sault Ste. Marie and Sudbury, and I get sat and I don't even go on the trip. So I stayed in Kitchener. So they lose both games up there. Then all of a sudden I started 10 games in a row. We went on a little run that year. We're playing London, and our other goalie at the time quits on the day of the game. Quits. So I've got no backup. We're playing London. Sure enough, first 3 shifts, Louis DeBrusque took 3 penalties, hitting me in the game. So third shift, the third one comes out, and he's standing in front of my net, and I'm ticked off, but Louis DeBrusque was a person you did not want to mess with. So he's standing in front of my crease, and I hack him. I break my stick over his ankle, and he turns around and he punches me. My helmet's in the corner, and so Rick Elaine jumps in. He looks fights Louis, and Louis was a year older than I was, so he would have been 18 at the time, 17, 18, and really good tilt between him and Rick. And Rick gets up after the refs break it up, and he looks at me, he goes, "I'll protect you forever, but don't ever do that again." Don't ever do that again. I said, "Sorry, Rick." And I was actually living with Rick at that time. So him and I were roommates. We were living in the same billet house at the time. But yeah, it was that was one of my favorite Rick Elaine stories. He's probably the reason I play golf nowadays, because he's the one who took me out golfing for the first time when I was about 17 years old and got me into golf. And he's the guy to thank for spending all my money on golf now.
We know, Torch, that you're a goaltender that liked handling the puck. You would take your chances when you got them to shoot at an empty net at the other end. So you've got a couple of those notches on your belt. But based on these stories, what about a goalie fight?
You know what? The only time I was ever involved in one was in pro, but it was even, I don't even remember. I jumped in because one guy jumped on top of my defenseman. I jumped in, and all of a sudden I'm getting pulled from behind, and I can't remember who the goalie was in minors, but that was the only really the first time. I never really got involved with that. I was always very fortunate to have great defensemen that jumped in for me. So, but I wasn't one of those guys that Louis DeBrusque incident was a rare incident. I wouldn't I wasn't one of those guys that would sit there and hack guys or punch guys. And, I played my game and worried about that. But I'll tell you another story later on, a Tyler Erdl story before that. We'll go on thereafter. But, yeah, that was my first year junior. And I didn't get involved in that stuff. So even in that brawl with Belleville, my first game, I just sat there with my gloves on going, this is nuts. What am I getting myself into here? But you know what? That first year, we'll go back to Joe McDonnell. That first year, I didn't, like I said, we got to Christmas time. So this is December. And I think I had 5 starts under my belt. The 4 or 5 starts, 4 or 5 games, might not have even been starts. We're probably 30 games in. I've played 4, maybe 5. And Gus Morshauser makes a World Junior team. So I remember right when he left, and we found out he was going to be staying and going to the World Juniors. I believe they were up in Alaska that year, and he ended up playing with Stéphane Fiset, was the other goalie that year for the Canada and the World Junior. But Joe McDonnell called me into the office, and he goes, "He's made the team. This is going to be your chance to shine, and let's do it." And then for every year that I played junior, right before Christmas, our last set of games was our Eastern trip. So we would we went in Cornwall, we went Belleville, we did separately, but we went Kingston, Cornwall, Ottawa, and then back home. So that was our Eastern swing at the time. So we were doing that. And, I got a chance to play all 3 games in basically 4 days. But yeah, you know what, that was kind of where it took off for me. And believe it or not, I played 5 games, and I ended up playing in 30 games that year. So when Gus came back from World Juniors, I was on such a streak that, he goes, "You've earned it." And I got a chance to play, and, ended up playing, I think it was 27 or 30 games my rookie year. But, so you like I said, he said, you're going to have to earn it. And that was something I realized at a young age, that nothing's going to be handed to you at this level. You're going to have to earn everything you get. And, but Joe believed in me, and that summer he traded Gus Morshauser to Hamilton, who was supposed to be hosting the Memorial Cup that year, and unfortunately didn't. But, like I said, you come into this league and you have to earn everything you get.
We'll get to that in just a second, that Memorial Cup. But what's your Tyler Ertl story?
Oh, good God. So it would have been, this was the same year. This was Memorial Cup year, second year. So we're playing the global game of the week. Now, North Bay, my rookie year, North Bay knocked us out in the first round. They came in, and a guy by the name of John Purvis absolutely obliterated the league. Yeah, I think we played them, and I think we lost in 4 or 5, and we were the first place team that first year. We had all stupid blue and red haircuts, and Kirk Tomlinson, we'll blame him for that one, but I can get to him later. But you know what? They came in and absolutely killed us. But the next year we played North Bay again in the playoffs. But right before the playoffs started, we were playing in Kitchener, and it was back then it was the global game of the week. So Jack Miller, I don't know if you remember, the ever famous Jack Miller was doing that game.
We had him on the pod.
Did you? Oh, that voice, you could hear that voice from wherever and know exactly who it was on that. So Jack Miller's doing the global game of the week with Jim Taddy at the time, and we're playing North Bay, and we're up. I think we're up 5-1 or 6-1 with 2 minutes left in the game, and Bert Templeton calls a timeout. So I'm sitting there going, it's like 6-1 with 2 minutes left in the game. He's calling a timeout. So we come out of the timeout, and he put Tyler Ertl at center, and on his wings were the 2 Antosky brothers. And then he had Van Kessel on defense, and Hatcher was the other defenseman. So Ertl was the only guy under 6'5" on the ice at the time. And sure enough, Ertl skates by me, and he goes, "Sorry, Torch." I go, "I get it." He didn't even say anything. He goes, "Sorry, Torch." I said, "Ertz, I get it." So we win the face-off. Puck comes back to me. I cover it. Ertl comes in and spears me. So he comes in and spears me. And I tell you, their 4 guys, they didn't even look at the puck. They just collapsed Ertl. And our guys are trying to get at Ertl. We had just traded Ertl to North Bay that summer after his rookie year, or 2 summers ago. So he was up in North Bay, and his dad was our GM at the time. So Bob Ertl was still our GM in Kitchener. And he just, before the puck was even dropped, he came over and goes, "Sorry." And we have a big brawl on the ice and everything else. And I guess Jack Miller is like, Ertl's just making a travesty of the game. This is like the global game of the week. He had to get a police escort out of the building just to get him onto the team bus and get him out of the arena there. And like it was nasty. That was our Memorial Cup year, the year we went to the Memorial Cup. So it was quite funny. But Ertl and I talk about it all the time, and we still have a good laugh about it.
Okay, so it's come up a couple of times already, and you just pointed out that Gus Morchauser, your former goaltending partner, gets traded to Hamilton because they're going to have the team. They're going to host that Memorial Cup. At what point that season, Torch, did it start to feel like this was coming together? And of course, with what was happening in Hamilton, did it dawn on you guys that the door is going to be even that much wider open that year?
Well, we knew. I guess when the league looked at Hamilton's record and it was 1-34 or 2-34-2 at the time, and they just said we can't put this team in the Memorial Cup. And it was just after Christmas we had heard that this team wasn't going to be able to host the Memorial Cup. So we knew that to get into the Memorial Cup you'd have to win your conference and be in the finals. But we were good. We had a very, very good hockey club that year, and and lots of guys who played lots of roles, but made some good trades that year. We pick up a guy like Jason York late in the year, and plays a big factor on our power play. But we knew we had a good team, and we basically knew if we could get through Niagara Falls that year, it would be the big test. Niagara Falls had a great hockey club with Scott Thornton, Keith Primo, Brad May, very good hockey club. But they're probably, their biggest weakness was probably behind the bench. They had a guy named Billy LaForge behind the bench who was a little cuckoo. So if you get under his skin, yeah, you could probably take the series against them. But his team was very, very solid. And my rookie year was he was coach there as well. And they had a guy by the name of Brian Fogarty who set unbelievable records that year. And they actually had a system that was called Thunder 41. So by saying 41, that meant 4 guys on the rush, only 1 defenseman back. Let me tell you, Brian Fogarty didn't get 140 points playing defense that year. He was a forward, and he was damn good at it. And unbelievable. But yeah, we knew if we could get through Niagara Falls that we would have an opportunity, and we knew we had a good enough team to get there. So we were pretty excited going into the playoffs.
Take me into Copps Coliseum as a young goaltender going there for the Memorial Cup, that giant building. What was your first feeling like walking out to ice level, looking up and going, how big of a building is this?
Well, you know what? I remember it was one of those ones, like our first game was a round robin game. And you got to remember, we went into the Memorial Cup. Obviously, we had lost in Game 7 of the finals to Oshawa in the league. So we went in as the complete underdog. So we went in as the 5th ranked team out of a 4-team tournament. So it was it was absolutely hilarious because the Canadian rankings used to come out back then, and we were ranked 5th, and there was only 4 teams in the tournament. So our first game, we came in and we came into a game against Kamloops at the time, who was coached by Ken Hitchcock at the time. And they had incredible team like Scott Niedermeyer, Daryl Sador, Mike Needham, Dave Chizowski was on that team. Corey Hirsch was their goalie at the time. But it's funny because that was a year, it was kind of funny that everyone always wanted that experienced goalie. And I think 2 or 3 of the goalies that played the biggest factor in the Memorial Cup, we were all 17 at the time. So Corey Hirsch was a starting goalie in Kamloops, myself in Kitchener, and Freddie came in Oshawa and played a big role there. But so it was, we came in against Kamloops, and honestly, I'd never been in the building until, we played the Hamilton Dukes there that year, because they had recently moved from Toronto, because they were the Toronto Marlboros my first year, and they moved to Hamilton. But I hadn't been in that building until we played our first game in there. And I think they're in the other division, but we only played them once that year. So we were in there once. And, I'm not even sure if I got to start in that game. So I can't even remember playing against them because they weren't very good. So that might have been my night off. So we went in there, and I hadn't played in there. And the first game we were going to play Kamloops, and my only recollection of that building was watching Mary Lemieux score that goal there in '87 to beat the Russians. And I was like, oh my God, this is where, I skate down to the ring. I skate down to that end where Mario scored. I go, that was pretty cool. Go take a look. And we got a chance to practice on there. But, it was it was pretty surreal. And, it's so funny because I believe those attendance records for that Memorial Cup stood for a long time, simply for the fact from Kitchener to Hamilton was about 45 minutes, to the Cops Coliseum 50 minutes, and from Oshawa to Hamilton you head down the 403 and you could be there in an hour and 20 minutes. So we're talking like record crowds. Like our first game there, we played Kamloops. I think we had about 9,000 people in the stands, and this is like the first game of the tournament. I was like, okay, so it was good to get the juices flowing in that game. But once that first game was done, then you knew you're in for the competition. We ended up beating Kamloops in a real barn burner, real goalie competition. I think it was 6-5 or 7-6. I can't remember what it was. But, our momentum really built from that game. We had a good game there against Kamloops. Then we went in and beat Laval. And then we had the overtime thriller to see who was going to get the bye to the finals. So we played Oshawa, and I believe we lost 4-3 or 5-4 in overtime, at double overtime in that one as well. It was just overtime, actually. But that was, we got through the round robin there, and we could have easily been 3-0, but we were 2-1. So we played the semifinal game, played Laval, and that one had another good crowd. Like, the crowds just steadily rose. We started off at 9,000, but I think that was our smallest crowd. And the first game in there, when we played Oshawa in the third game of the round robin, I believe like there was 13,000 at that game, 14,000. So it was, it was kind of the eye opener. And like, I was 17 years old. I didn't know any different. So whatever. It's like, let's go play. So it was one of those things. But yeah, that Memorial Cup really stands out for certain reasons.
That final against Oshawa. So you go 7 games against them in the OHL final. They get the better of you. But that was a hammer and tong series between the Rangers and the Generals. Then you talk about in the round robin, they best you in overtime. What are your feelings going in? Like, I can't imagine the feeling going into a Memorial Cup championship, but now against this team that's got the better of you, but only barely in that round robin. But you're going in against Oshawa for the national championship. What's going through your mind?
Well, I knew we could beat them. Like, we'd shown we could beat them during the year and everything else, but we knew it was going to be tight. Like, I think we played that 7-game final against Oshawa, and only one game was decided by more than one goal in that whole series. Like, it was a very tight series. So we knew we had an opportunity to beat them. And basically, they were a 4-line team. They could roll 4 lines at you, and their 4th line was just as good as some of the guys on their 1st and 2nd line. They were very good. And we had a 4th line that probably didn't play a shift the whole tournament. And that was a big thing. But our first 3 lines were really, really, really good. When your 3rd line centerman scores 98 points in the year, you got a good hockey club. And our 3rd line center that year was, I think, Jason Firth. And, we had Mark Montanari was our number 1 center, Joey St. Aubin, our number 2 center. And then we had Jason Firth as our 3rd center. And Jason Firth was probably one of the most underrated hockey players I've ever played with. So skilled, so good, so talented. And, his left winger was a guy by the name of Gilbert Dion, who that year was in his 2nd year. He scored 48. He was our 3rd line left winger, scored 48 goals that year. It was incredible. So we had depth on our first 3 lines, and we knew we could play with them. But that was a hell of an Oshawa hockey club over there. Their depth was unreal up front. Eric Lindros, Ian Fraser, and Dale Craigwell, I think, was their 4th line center that year, who went on to have a pretty good NHL career and good pro career. But that's how deep they were up front. So we knew we could match them. But it was just one of those ones where you knew the team that got the right bouncer was going to win the game. And I've run into 40,000 people that were at that game, and everyone was at that game in Oshawa. But I'll tell you, it's one of those games that, everyone always says, have you ever watched the game? I go, no. I remember the game very well. I lived the game, so there's nothing in it that I have to watch to remember the game. But it was one of those games that it's kind of etched right there in your memory. That it's one of those memories that doesn't go away. It's there, and it always will be, because people never stop talking about it. Still to this day, I still hear about it whenever people think, "Oh, they have Memorial Cup in 1990. I was there, sitting right behind you." I was like, "Oh, that's great." But yeah, it is one of those games that was iconic, because it was really the first game first time, I think it was the first time that the Memorial Cup got put on prime time. Every game was on TV. Before, it was just the final game, and that was a year, I think it was TSN that did it. I can't remember, but Bob McKenzie did that. But the commentator was Paul Romanuk at the time, and he's the one who was doing the play-by-play. And I remember listening to him maybe about 10 years ago. He was on the Fan, and I'm not even sure. He might have been on with your buddy Greg Brady there. And Greg Brady asked him about junior hockey, and he goes, what's the greatest game you've ever called? He goes, you've called lots of Spengler Cups and tournaments and everything. And he goes, by far the greatest game I've ever called was that 1990 Memorial Cup final between the Oshawa Generals and Kitchener. So, even that was 20 years after the fact, people were still talking about that game and what an impact it had. And it was kind of the impact game that put junior hockey on the map, because, and let's not kid ourselves, it wasn't because we were the Kitchener Rangers. It was probably because they had a guy named Lindros on the other team that really put it on the map. But, to be involved in that game and to be part of that game was pretty amazing.
You talked about that opening game. I just want to point out it was 8-7 in overtime, Torch.
Oh, I knew it was high scoring. I couldn't remember if it was 7-6 or
even with an 8-7 game in there, you still won the goaltender of the tournament. So I want to go back to that actual double overtime against Oshawa. Yeah. What did you see or not see on that goal?
I saw everything. I saw it pretty clearly. We had the puck in the corner. Chris LaPuma grabs the puck in the corner, and he goes to bank it off the glass. So he's going up the board. So he's going off the glass and out. Puts it off the glass, and they've got 6'6" defenseman standing at the blue line, who knocks it down. Billy Armstrong knocks it down and just puts it down. And all he did was put it down. Our forward went out to him, and he just turned around and just fired it towards the net. So I went down. We were hemmed in our end. We were in our end for a little while there. So I was trying to get a whistle. So I'm going down to try to control the puck. It's coming right at me. It's going to hit me in the chest. And, one of my defensemen sticks his stick out, gets just enough of it to change total direction of it, and goes up and deflects up and over my shoulder. And I think I got a piece of it on the way in, but just not enough to stop it. And it's probably one of the softest shots that I had to face in that game. And it's the one that beats you. Like I said, it was going to be a lucky bounce or a break. And, my defenseman is trying to knock this puck down, and unfortunately, it ends up in the back of our net, and that's how we lose the Memorial Cup.
So here's and that just says it all. The way this all comes to an end, the thrill of the tournament, how people look back on it as being as big as it really was. Some 20 years later, Torch, you and I can't shake this, but you and I are working together, and we're at a game in North Bay, and Corey Banica is there as a scout. Now, I didn't know Corey up until this point. You run into him. You guys hug like you're old friends, long lost brothers, and you make the introduction. And I'm like, okay, hang on a second. This is Corey Banica, who played for the Oshawa Generals team that beat your Kitchener Rangers in that Memorial Cup, and you're like long lost friends. So clearly, in the years after, like the players that were involved in that, you kind of that agony of defeat that we talk about so much in sports. You get over it after a while, and those of you that participated in that game, in that tournament, remain friends later on.
Do you know what, Mike? That year we played Oshawa in the regular season, and I think both our games were done with them before we even got to Christmas. So we didn't see them again until the finals. But basically between the finals and the Memorial Cup, I'd say in the 3-week span, we played each other 9 times in the 3-week span, or 4-week span probably. And there's such a mutual respect between the players on those two teams because it was such a hard fought series. And, it was one of those series where you look back, the hockey was so good, but there wasn't anything stupid that happened in that series. It was a very, I'm not saying it was very, nobody wanted to hit each other. It was a very tough series, but there was nothing stupid that happened. There was no dirty hits, no anything like that going out of the way. Even with a guy like Lindros, a lot of teams tried to intimidate Eric and do a lot of things to Eric. Tough to intimidate that boy. He was 6'5" when he was 13 years old, and probably a man amongst boys when he was growing up. But a great guy. Eric and I we started playing hockey together in Pee Wee. So I'd known Eric for years, and and as far as some of the other guys on that team, those are guys. A lot of the guys on that team are guys I kind of grew up playing against each other, and a lot of the guys on our team knew the guys on their team. So there's always that connection. The hockey world's kind of funny in that way, but they had guys like Rob Pearson, Jared Scaldi, Dale Craigwell, all played. They're all local guys who played in the Oshawa minor. John Paul Davis was another guy, JP Davis, who's now in Sarnia. So I run into him every once in a while, still to this day. But we grew up playing against each other, so we've known each other. I've known these guys. We beat Oshawa in the semifinals of the All Ontarios in Bantam with all these guys on this team. So it's not like we hadn't known each other, but it was always one of those things where it was very mutual respect between the teams. So still to this day, I ended up playing pro hockey with a lot of the guys off that team. I played with Dale Craigwell, played Joe Basillo over in Europe, and I played with Rob Pearson. Rob Pearson and I became very, very good friends. Still to this day, his wife and my wife Laura, they used to hang out together all the time. We were in Portland together with Washington's farm team, so we spent a lot of time together. And it's one of those things that mutual respect. So a guy like Corey Bannica was a hard-nosed player on that team, but he was a fourth liner, probably played slightly more than our fourth line did in the Memorial Cup. But, he was one of those guys that every time he was on the ice, you knew he was there because just never stopped working. And, you have respect for guys like that because they make a lot out of what they have. And a lot of them weren't the most skilled guys, but the heart was in the right place. And you have to respect that in this game.
I remember seeing Jared Scaldi come up to the media room the one time, and he walks in and you guys both get this big smile on your face. And there's a big hug, and he's Torch. I'm looking over at you going, how are you talking to this guy right now? I'd be losing it. After that Memorial Cup, Kitchener kind of did a rebuild before a rebuild, if you will. Did you ever ask or think about leaving town to go chase it again?
Well, I'm sure Joe McDonnell I'm not sure if he would have told you the story, but
there's a reason why I asked this question.
There was one opportunity to leave town, and basically Joe asked me if I wanted to go. And, I was in my 4th year. I was about to sign my first pro contract. So for me to leave after 4 years of bleeding blue, red, and white, it wasn't worth it for me to chase it one more time. I wanted to, and it's funny because it would have been with a lot of guys I knew, and it would have been up in North Bay. So my best friend was playing in North Bay, was Drake Berhowski at the time. He was in North Bay at the time. But, it would have been the trade deadline my last year. And Joe McDonnell gave me the option. And he goes, I can move you, or you can finish off here. And I said, no, Joe, I want to finish my 4 years as a Kitchener Ranger, and I wanted to stay here. And we actually ended up going on a pretty good run that last year. We had an unbelievable series against the Sioux in the conference semifinals. they ended up going in, and they were at the Memorial Cup the year before, and we had a 7-game series. Some guy's been on Twitter tweeting about it, Mike, and you and I, he keeps tagging you and I in the post, but
Chris.
Chris up in the
Yeah.
and we had unbelievable series up there. So there was the option for me to go to North Bay that year, and I refused the trade. Joe and it's not like I had a no trade clause or anything like that. Those didn't exist back then. But Joe gave me the option, and that was part of the respect that Joe and I had between one another. And he goes, you've been here 4 years, and I'm going to give you the option. If you want to go, I'll let you go and chase a Memorial Cup up in North Bay, or you can stay here. And I said, no, I want to stay and finish my 4 years in Kitchener.
You mentioned Ken Hitchcock's name before, coaching Kamloops in that Memorial Cup. You played for him, if I'm not mistaken, in Kalamazoo as you started out in the pro.
Oh, God, yeah. Ken Hitchcock, there was a meeting to tell you when the next meeting was going to be. It's kind of like a Doug Ford announcement. It's not much different than a Doug Ford announcement. You didn't really know what it was about, but Ken Hitchcock, probably one of the most brilliant hockey minds I've ever played for, just so prepared and did his homework so much. But he was one of those guys, very abrasive, just didn't see eye to eye with everyone. So Hitch really rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. But our saving grace when I played for him in Kalamazoo was our assistant coach. So he's a guy we probably saw. He was a head coach in Winnipeg, Claude Noel. Oh my God, this guy, like Hitch would come in and do a meeting and just everyone be sitting there going, oh my God, Hitch, leave us alone. And then Claude would come in, dance, and go, "Hey boys, how's it going?" And he was the comedy act in between, but also a great hockey mind. And Claude was a guy who I believe was with Bert Templeton up in North Bay when he first started, and he started up in North Bay. But you got to have that balance there, and I think that's why there's that chemistry between a guy like Pete DeBoer and Steve Spott that works so well, because they have this chemistry where they feed off one another. This guy will go in and play the heavy, and Steve Spott will come in afterwards and kind of rub you the right way and make sure everything's all right. And coaches develop that chemistry. So that's why you see a lot of these coaches, whether it's pro hockey or junior hockey, stay together, and they work well together. And there's a reason they have success.
Fast forward a couple of years after Kalamazoo, and you end up getting a shot in Dallas. You walk into that room, there's the Hatcher brothers, there's Peter Zezel, and there's a guy by the name of Mike Modano. What's going through a young Mike Torchia's mind when he walks in and sees a guy by the last name Modano?
You know what? I'll go before that. I'll go before I played my first NHL game. I went into my first training camp. So I got drafted. The year I got drafted, going to training camp, and I know I've got another year junior left. So we go into training camp, and in training camp back then, it wasn't go out there practice. So you either practice and then play a scrimmage, and then the other team you played against would practice after the scrimmage. So there was 2 teams. So my first year I was on Team Hertzberg. So Craig Hertzberg was my captain. The other team was Team Ramage, which was Rob Ramage was the other captain on the other side. So I was on Team Hertzberg. I was 18 years old, and I think I was paired up with, I think it was John Casey I was paired up with my first year. So we're sharing the net, and he plays, of course, it's the first inter-squad or scrimmage we have, and he plays the first half because he's John Casey. He goes, I'm playing the first half. So, okay, you tell me what you want me to do. So I'm sitting on the bench, and sure enough, halfway through, he goes, we switch up. So I go in. And wouldn't you know it, the very first shot I face, Mike Modano on a semi breakaway. And he got to the top of the circle and he just snapped the shot. And I tell you, I don't think I moved till the puck was already on its way back out of the net. His release was absolutely ridiculous. Probably one of the best shots I faced. And now I got a chance to play against Al McInnes and Brett Hall and all these guys. But his release was, and we always talk about Mark Messier, his ability to shoot and do that. I would put Mike Modano right up there with a Mark Messier type release, and just unbelievable. And probably by far the one of the most, no, I will say he is the most skilled guy I've ever played with in my life. Just unbelievable how talented he was and how he could skate, and everything was effortless with him. So he was scary. And that was my first shot I faced, was a shot off Mike Modano's stick, and I didn't even move. So my goals against was about 60 before I could even start.
Okay, from that first training camp and Mike Modano scoring on you in a scrimmage, fast forward a few years to your first pro game. And I'm pretty sure it was on the road in the old Chicago arena. Amante, Roenick, you're against Belfour, and you're playing your first National Hockey League game.
Well, to backtrack on that a bit, we were in Kalamazoo like about a week before, and we were playing the Chicago Wolves. Now, and this is part of the story, because the guy who I was there with was Gord Donnelly, had got sent down to us for a conditioning assignment. So we went into Chicago, and Chicago Wolves had a great hockey club in the IHL, and we go in and we beat Chicago Wolves in overtime, and Gord Donnelly scores the winning goal. Gord Donnelly shouldn't have even been on the ice in overtime, but he scores the winning goal. And sure enough, so he scores the winning goal. We win Chicago 2-1. So 2 days later, Darcy Wakaluk got hurt in a game in Detroit. So I get called up, but Andy Moog's playing, and he's playing well, and then he gets hurt. So we're sitting there, and both of us we have two goalies called up. So from our Kalamazoo team, we're both playing in Dallas at the time. So Andy Moog had tweaked his groin. Darcy Wakaluk had a broken hand. So it was myself and Manny Fernandez. So basically we played Saturday in Detroit, and Sunday afternoon we were in Chicago. So it was kind of a coin flip, but he started Manny Saturday in Detroit, and Detroit had a pretty good team at the time too. And we went into Detroit and we lost 5-4, 5-4, 4-3, something like that. But it was a good game. So I'm sitting on the bench, and I'm sitting there going, holy shit. So we were sitting there and didn't realize it. But the next night, it's an afternoon game, and we're playing in Chicago on the afternoon. So we left Detroit, jumped on the puddle jumper, went over to Chicago, check into the hotel. So we're sitting there at breakfast the next day, and like, we weren't sure if Andy Moog was going to be back in the lineup. Just had to tweak his groin, so we weren't sure who was going to be starting. So we're sitting there at breakfast, and so it's 2:00 in the afternoon game. It was one of the first games Fox Network ever did, and they had the stupid blue puck in that game. And we're sitting there at breakfast and having breakfast, and Bob Gainey's going over, we had a good game yesterday. We got to do this better. We're coming into Chicago. We got a great club. We got to make sure we're ready for this. He goes, okay, Gord Donnelly, you're in the lineup tonight. I can't remember who he sat out. And he goes, and Torch, you'll start. And that was it. He walked out of the room, and I was like looking around going, me? I was like, okay. So it was like, this is like 10:30, and the game's at 2 p.m. So sure enough, didn't even have time to get nervous, which was probably the best thing, because everything happened so fast. So went in, packed my bag, packed my suitcase, and I jumped in a cab, and I wanted to go to the rink early. So I got to the rink beforehand. I didn't take the team bus. I just got to there early because I was just like, oh my God, I got to get focused here. So thankfully they had just moved out of the old Chicago Stadium, and they're in the new United Center, which it is now. But get there, and I'm just like, holy crap, I'm ready. I'm not really ready for this, but sure enough, you go out there, and it's one of those games. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was one of those games that was kind of surreal. So you kind of don't even know it until the game's over that you're kind of involved in it. So it was unbelievable, because I'm just looking down at their lineup, and I think they started at Roenick, Amante, Murphy, with Chelios, and I can't remember who. It was Gary Suter was the other defenseman there, and Belfour in net. And I'm just like, that's a pretty good lineup, if you ask me. So I better be careful here. And but we went in, and we played in Chicago that night. So I had just played in Chicago probably on the Wednesday, and this was a Sunday. So I played there on the Wednesday with Kalamazoo, in the other arena in Chicago, and then go in and now I'm playing at United Center. So Gord Donnelly he goes, we got this. He goes, we own this town. And I'm just like, we own this town. So we beat the Chicago Wolves on Wednesday. This is the Chicago Blackhawks. This is a different lineup. Well, sure enough, we had won Wednesday in Chicago 2-1 against the Wolves. Well, sure enough, we win Sunday 2-1 against the Blackhawks. And Gord Donnelly scores the winning goal in that game as well. And we were just like, he goes, I told you we own this town. And then we got on a flight to Vancouver after that and left for Vancouver after the game. But it was one of those experiences where, I remember it right from the morning because, you weren't sure. We weren't even sure if Andy Moog was going to get back in the lineup and play that night. And he ended up playing 2 or 3 days later in Vancouver. But we weren't even sure. Like, they thought he might dress in that game Sunday in Chicago. But that's how I got my first start.
There's not too many people that can say that they have a winning record in the National Hockey League. Do you still have that first puck? The first.
I do. I actually have the puck. I have the game sheet. Bob Gainey gave me the game sheet from that game, the puck, and everything else. I actually have my stick from that game. It's always great because there's a local tie in there because the referee in that game was Lance Roberts. So,
come on.
Yeah, so Lance was a referee in my first NHL game. And we still joke about it to this day, but he's on the ice. He goes, you got this, Torch. Have fun with it. And I was like, okay, I got this, but thanks, Lance.
Sorry, I want to follow that up just real quick because that brought me to a great point. Like, anyone who has met you knows that you are exactly what you are right now. This happy-go-lucky guy, loves to talk, there's excuse me, hasn't been many people walk into the media room in Kitchener that haven't been excited to see you if they know you. Were you that way on the ice? Like, or were you like when Lance walks by and goes, you got a Torch? You're like, yeah, thanks, Lance. And then you go carry on. Oh, I'm just going to stop Tony Amonte.
Nope. I was not like that at all. I was super intense, almost to a point where I had to teach myself not to be so intense. I was what it was. Like when the game time came, I was ready to play. I was ready to go to battle, and I wanted to win. For me, winning was everything. I wanted to win every game I played, and it didn't matter who I was playing against. I could have been playing against my mother. I wanted to win. It wouldn't have made a difference to me. But my persona wasn't the same on the ice as it is off the ice. Off the ice, I've gotten to know a lot of people, and I've been friendly with a lot of people. But on the ice, didn't matter if you were standing in my crease. You were going to get a shove and get out of my way because I want to see the puck. I want to stop the puck. And that was just my competitive nature.
What ultimately was it, Torch, that led to the decision that you're done toiling in North America and the National Hockey League, and you made that decision, which I know you loved, and you can share the stories of your European tour, quite frankly. But what was the catalyst for that to say, you know what, no more pursuing the National Hockey League. I'm going over to Europe to play hockey.
You know what? It was 1 year that I think I spent the season getting traded. I think you can check my hockey DB, but it was an interesting year. I know Pope has laughed about it a few times on my suitcase year. And that was a year I blew out my knee when I was in Washington and got traded. I was in Portland, Maine. I started in Washington, went to Portland, blew out my knee, went to Hampton Roads on a conditioning assignment to play for Brophy after my knee recovered. So I was out for about 10 or 12 weeks. So I went down on a conditioning assignment. Well, then injuries happened in Dallas. So Dallas needed goalies. So they signed a guy. So they had called up their goalies from Kalamazoo at the time, which was Marty Turco, I believe. So they called him up. So then Kalamazoo was short a goalie, and they had no one in the system. So I ended up going to Kalamazoo, and I played one game in Kalamazoo, and then another goalie got hurt in Dallas. So then they signed Alan Bester. So part of the deal, and this is how it all happened, believe it or not. They signed Alan Bester. So Alan Bester went to Dallas, and now Orlando Solar Bears were without a goalie. So I went from Kalamazoo to Orlando. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And this was all within, like, I went down on a 2-week conditioning assignment, and I'd been played for 5 different teams or 4 different teams in like 3 weeks. I was like, this is ridiculous. So we ended up staying in, and I just got married that summer. So we ended up staying in Orlando and loved it there. Got traded at the deadline. Then I got traded at the deadline to Anaheim. And I think I finished off the year in Baltimore after Orlando. So yeah, I did a world tour that year. And it was quite interesting, but I met a ton of people and a lot of guys who are coaches in the NHL now, coaches at CIS, all played on that team in Orlando. And, it was kind of a world tour that year. And that was kind of the breaking point. I played one more year in the old IHL. The next year I played in Fort Wayne. I had one more year left of my contract with Anaheim, played there. And then I played one more year in Milwaukee after that. And that was it. I was like, you know what? This is not fun for me anymore over here. Got an opportunity to go to Europe. And basically it was the thought of playing a shorter season and making more money than I made here was pretty enticing. When you're over here and like our seasons in the old IHL were grueling. Like we were 84 game season, and like my second last year in Fort Wayne, 84 game season. I played with Tim Shovelday that year. Tim Shovelday was my goalie partner, and he quit in December. He goes, I've had enough of this game. So he quit in December or January. That year in 84 game season, I started 59 games that year in pro. So it took its toll, like it takes its toll on your body, and you're practicing and you practice every day. And our coach that year was a real fitness nut, was Dave Farish, who was awesome. Absolutely one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. But we knew we were in for it when we all had to buy heart rate monitors so we could skate and practice and measure our heart rate to make sure we were working hard enough. So you always knew it was time to, the heart rate monitors would come out of the dressing room. You take off your upper body stuff as a goalie, put your heart rate monitor on, and we knew we were skating. And I was like, damn, I hate this. But awesome guy. We would, so played for Dave Farish in Fort Wayne, and the grind of going through that 84 game schedule was tough, and you practice every day. And that was a year after I blew up my knee in Portland. So I was like, I'm looking for a change and just to kind of slow things down. So I went over to Europe, and I got a call, and they said, well, you're going to go over. And I went over. My first stop was over in Italy, and it was just like, it's a 45 to 50 game season, then playoffs, and then you're done. So you start early, you're done early. Sometimes we practice, sometimes we don't. Depends when the rest of the team works or not. It was really laid back, but it was real eye-opening over there as well. But so it was more the thought of going over there, make decent money, more than we were making in the minors for sure, but only playing half the games we had to play over in North America.
You mentioned that year you injured your knee, the suitcase year. I just want to point out only a losing record on one of those teams. So just pointing out some stats.
Portland. It was in Portland.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a losing record. Remember that year. Yeah, no, I had a blast that year. Like I only played one game in Kalamazoo. We went in, and it's funny because I flew into Kalamazoo and they had no goalie for the game. So our trainer there was a guy by the name of Corky Osborne, who was Mario Lemieux's trainer when Mario went through the Hodgkin's lymphoma in Pittsburgh. But he was my trainer there for the 2 previous years. And Cork was probably the nicest guy in the world and great trainer. But I show up to the game, and the only thing that didn't make it was my new knee brace. So I show up to play, and my knee brace that I'm supposed to wear doesn't show up with me. So I've only skated like 3 times with my knee brace on. So I'm going into this like totally screwed. And he goes, don't worry, I'll tape you up. So he had me all taped up, and and I played and won there. Next thing I know, I'm in Orlando, had a great time over there. Kurt Fraser was the coach in Orlando at the time, and they had a really good hockey club there. And guys like Todd Richards on that team, Craig Duncanson, who's coaching up at Laurentian, and had a great time there, and Craig Fisher, who's coaching at UQRT. But you go over there and you just make the best of the situation. you enjoy what it is, and you have fun with it. And that year, as much as it was crappy to be moved that many times, I met so many people that I'd never known before, and that's part of the game. That's the fun part of the game that people don't even think about. But it's not always about the hockey. It's about the people you meet and how they impact your lives or how they become part of your life.
You mentioned a name in that suitcase here as a coach, Brophy, John Brophy, well known. I can see the look on your face already.
It's actually one of my favorite stories. We're playing, and so I'm down there in Hampton Roads. So he's coaching in Hampton Roads. So I get down there for a 2-week conditioning assignment. Now, there's so many aspects of this story that aren't funny, but they are funny. The guy who was the goalie, they had 2 goalies in Hampton Roads at the time. So they had the guy by the name of Mark Bernard, who's now the assistant GM in Chicago. So Barney was the assistant GM in Chicago at the time, or he was one of the goalies at the time. And the other guy was named by another guy by the name of Todd Hunter, who was actually my wedding party when I got married that summer. So he was a really good friend of mine from here, from Kitchener. So he's a Waterloo guy. Well, sure enough, they had to make roster room. So Todd Hunter gets released, and that was his last game of pro hockey. So he comes back. But anyhow, we'll go off on that later. But he comes home. So John Brophy's the coach there, and John Brophy was married to a female golfer, and he was one of those guys that really wore the game on his sleeve and just loved the game, but so intense, like always. His face was always red because he was always yelling at someone, right? So he was probably the most intense guy out there. And we were in practice one day, and just a simple breakout drill. Brophy was old school. So if the defenseman couldn't handle the puck, you had to make sure the puck got out of the zone. So he dumps the puck in, come in, break out with pressure, unsuccessful. Dump it in again, do it again, same guy. Well, the poor defenseman, who was actually a Toronto guy, so I'd known him from Toronto, was a guy by the name of Richie Brania. And he is up and down. He is crawling up and down Richie's back. He is yelling at him, if you can't do it, I try not to swear when I do Brophy in person. He goes, if you can't freaking do it, he goes, get off the ice. He goes, you get that puck, I want to make sure it gets out of the zone. It's got to be hard around the glass. So I don't know if you remember Brophy well, but Brophy had this muffet of white hair, and it stood out like a sore thumb. So sure enough, he dumps the puck in. Richie comes around, pressure coming on. Brophy goes over to the sideboards after he dumps it in. Richie goes around the net. So instead of even making a play, he takes the puck and he wires it right around the glass, and it hits Brophy right in the back of the head. So he's got this mop of white hair, and all of a sudden it's going red, and he is bleeding all over the ice. And, in typical Bro fashion, he looks at him and goes, that's effing better. And he skates off the ice. And that was it. As long as the puck got out, he didn't care. That was Bro. But Bro, one of those guys that was so intense, but he had a player assistant coach down there with time was Al McIsaac. And, Al was great, but, Bro was that guy who just so intense, but, he pulled you in. We were, and I think Bro had quit drinking by that time, but we were at a game, and we went out after the game for a bite to eat, and he calls me over, and I sat down, just had a coffee, and he goes, come here. He's grumpy, and it's like, but then once you start talking to him and the stories start flowing at him, I grew up in Toronto, so you grew up in Toronto, and I remember the days where John Brophy was coaching Toronto Maple Leafs. So now I was playing for John Brophy, and we just went on and talked about those stories. The funny story is when he was coaching the Maple Leafs, I was playing for the Marlboros, Toronto Marlboros, and we used to practice at 6:30, 7:30 in the morning on Saturday morning at Maple Leaf Gardens. So right after our practices, the Leafs would come on the ice for their pregame skate. So he was coach there at the time. So we talked about that for a bit. But those were the good times at Maple Leaf Gardens, because we weren't allowed to hit the boards or hit the glass with the pucks at that early in the morning because Mr. Ballard was sleeping. So he was sleeping at the rink. So you had to keep the noise down. So it was always interesting there, but a lot of fun.
There's plenty of stories surrounding Harold Ballard, that's for sure. I want to go back to when you were. Or do you have a Harold Ballard story you want to tell?
No.
Okay.
There was no shortage of stories in Toronto. He wasn't very well liked, man.
Yeah, no. But when you did go overseas, it's obviously wasn't the KHL or anything like that, but do you have any like duffel bag full of money stories or like missed plane flights or anything like that?
There was a few of those, but it wasn't duffel bags. We didn't get that money. But there's always like the ways around it. Like these teams, they entice you with this, like we'll pay your taxes for you. So it's tax-free money. So you're making good money tax-free. Well, then you get your first, like I only got paid 3 times a year. So my first year in Italy was really bizarre. I got paid when I got there. Then I got another segment in December and another one in February or something like that. So I get paid and I get a check and I'm like, what the hell is this? I go, this isn't what we agreed to. He goes, oh, no, don't worry. Come tomorrow to the office. So the way my salary was structured, they only wanted to pay so much tax on it. So my paycheck only showed that I made so much, but the rest of it got paid in a brown envelope full of American dollar bills. So I was like, oh my God, what do I do with the rest of this money? So now I'm walking around with like, I think it was the first one was like, I was walking around with 15,000 US in my pocket going, 15 or 20,000 US in my pocket going, this is stupid. Why am I walking around with it? I was like trying to be inconspicuous. I got this big brown envelope in my pocket. I was like, okay, but yeah, that's the way. There's always ways around it in Europe. They entice you over there with certain things. And that year in Italy was one of the years that was, it was probably one of the years that I was like, I'm glad I got out of there because I was one of like we had a bunch of Canadian guys there, like all guys we played with, like I played with a guy by the name of Carmen Vanni. Bob Mano was my coach in Italy, and but you play over there. Trevor Gallant, who was with us in Kitchener my last year, and you go over there and you realize, okay, I'm the only one that speaks Italian on this whole team out of this roster of Canadian guys, and sure enough, it was like every time the GM wanted to talk to someone, I was the translator, and I'm like, this is getting old. Like, you're not performing, and I got to tell the guy he's not performing. And I'm like, I don't want to talk to him. I said, it was one of those stupid things. I was just kind of caught in the middle there. Another guy who actually was the head coach of the one of the coaches of the world U.S. World Junior team was a guy by the name of Corey Leyland, was one of my teammates over there as well. So, there's a lot of good hockey players over in Europe, but there's a lot of guys that, at the time, like Corey Leyland was a 5'9" defenseman. Those were unheard of back then. If you weren't 6'2", 6'3", and now it's changed so much. That's how the game's changed so much. Before you had to be 6'2", 6'3" to be a player in the league. Now you could be 5'6", but you have to be 6'5" to be a goalie in the league. So that's how the NHL has changed from back then. And there was a lot of small defensemen that were really, really good hockey players that ended up going over to Europe and playing over in Europe and making a heck of a career over there. Another Kitchener guy that we know, Brad Schlegel, was one of those guys. Was considered a smaller defenseman at the time, but went over to Austria and over to Germany and over there and made a great career for himself and did really well over there.
Wasn't there an arena you played in while over in Europe, Torch, that was open air on one end?
There was almost all of them were open air that year. Our arena had no walls. We had a roof, but we had no walls. So the arena I played at in Oshawa, they were all excited because they had just put up a roof a few years before. So everything else, but I'm glad they were open air, or else you wouldn't be able to see friggin' from the smoke from all the flares that the fans are lighting in the stands. Like there's road flares going off in the stand. It was like a soccer game inside the hockey rink. You might as well have been smoking on the ice because friggin' everyone around you was smoking right in your face. So it was just like, it was crazy over there. But yeah, no, we had snowed out and we were playing in, and I'm trying to remember, I got to get my town straight. We were playing, I can't remember the name of the town now, in northern Italy. So it was almost in Switzerland. but open air stadium, and there's a blizzard outside, and the one end of the rink is open and the other end of the rink is closed. But the wind was blowing in from the open end of the rink, and it was snowing. Like, there was snow there was probably 3 or 4 inches of snow by the 10-minute mark of the first period up to the blue line. That's how hard it was snowing inside the rink. Like, it was absolutely crazy. The referees would go shovel it out, but it was like, this is ridiculous. So they ended up calling the game partway through the second, but I was in net in the second period, and all I could feel was snowing on my back and just wanting to get out of there so bad. And it was so cold. But those are it was so cool over there. Like, the experiences in some of those arenas, like, you go into places like Vienna, like, who would ever go to Vienna to watch a hockey game? We got to go travel over there and see part of the city, and it was pretty cool.
Okay, time for one of Farwell and I's favorites, because I think we've had this conversation numerous times around the rink. But have you ever, when you look back at your life around hockey, what was the most interesting dinner you had?
I knew you were going to go there eventually. You know what? We just played in LA, and I didn't play. So going out for dinner after the game, and some of the guys are going out. Russ Courtnall goes, "We're going out for dinner. Come on over." So we go out for dinner at this place, and sure enough, Wayne Gretzky sitting there with his wife, and and you look at the table, and I'm like, it's Johnny Cochran over. Like, no, that was it was Robert Shapiro, who was the one lawyer. And I go, this is Johnny Cochran over there at the other table, and I'm like, the hell are we? It's like Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell are over there, and it's like, go out for dinner. And it's like, okay. So got into drinking a few and had a few beverages at the time. So we went over and we wanted to talk to Robert Shapiro. So this is the height of the O.J. Simpson trial. So this is like, okay. So sure enough, we sat there and talked with Robert Shapiro for probably an hour and a half, and just trying to quiz him on this O.J. Simpson trial that's about to happen. And of course, he's not giving up any information, just a smile on his face and just kind of going about his day. But it was always so much fun just to be around those guys. And yeah, that was one of those dinners that you didn't forget, because I was like, what am I doing here? It's like I have no business being here at this dinner table.
I don't think there are many dinner stories or stories to begin with on a hockey podcast where you just completely breeze by Wayne Gretzky's name.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, Wayne's there.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't, you know what? I grew up, like, I remember being in Chesswood Arena when they filmed Mr. Big and Mr. Great, the Wayne Gretzky commercial where he was promoting Mr. Big. And he was wearing this white outfit. And I was going to Rick Vive Hockey School when I was about 10 years old. And there's next door in the other arena, they're filming that Wayne Gretzky commercial. Well, I grew up with Brent, and I'd known Brent for years. So I've known the Gretzky family for years. And actually, we talked about it. Mike Farwell and I did a Brantford Athlete of the Year thing over in Brantford, and I got to sit with Walter, and Walter and I were talking about stories from when we were in Pee Wee, and Brent and I were playing against each other in Pee Wee in tournaments, and he would remember stuff that was absolutely obscure, but it was absolutely hilarious. But those are the things. Like, I've watched Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky was Wayne Gretzky at the time. There was no bigger athlete probably in the world at the time than Wayne Gretzky. Maybe Michael Jordan was coming up at the time and could kind of put himself in that category. But Wayne Gretzky, like, he put hockey on the map. Like, there was no one in the States. Like, if you were in the States, like Wayne Gretzky, everyone knew who Wayne Gretzky was. They couldn't say that about too many hockey players at the time, but he was the one. When that trade happened from Edmonton to LA, he put hockey on the map down there, and he changed the game, because without Wayne Gretzky, you don't have 3 teams in Southern California. There is absolutely no way you support 3 teams in Southern California. We got 2. We got teams in Texas now because of Gretzky. Bottom line, so he was way bigger. He's one of those guys that, he's way bigger than the game ever was, and he didn't want to be. and he just kind of wanted to be Wayne Gretzky, but he's way bigger than the game will ever be.
That's my Walter Gretzky picture, Torch. We were talking about that,
Yeah.
of course, at the time of Walter's passing. Everybody seems to have one. My Walter Gretzky picture is me, Walter, and you at that Brantford Athlete of the Year event.
And that was one of those ones. He was great too. Like he sat there and he's giving me pens. He's giving me Walter Gretzky markers. He even gave me his prayer that he said at dinner out of his wallet, and I still have it in my wallet. I'm telling you, Mike, that's the way he was. That's the way, yeah, he was that way. It was great.
It is so great. Before we let you go, Torch, because these stories are great. And, I want to just quickly share my favorite memory of our time together, Torch, where I got to hear most of these stories for the first time. We were coming home from a playoff game in Windsor, and you and I had driven ourselves as opposed to being on the bus. And it just kind of started. I think it was a Sunday afternoon. So anyway, we were coming back though down the 401, and we just were chatting like anybody, the broadcast team would in the car, and these stories just started coming out. It's not like I was priming you for anything. I'm not trying to draw stuff out. I'll never forget that trip, really, and the chat we had that day. It's stuck in my memory forever. It really is.
Well, you know what? That was the trip. We had to take that trip because we were like, I'm not staying in the hotel with these guys for 4 or 5 days. Because
Right.
they took the bus and they were in the hotel for 4 days. And you and I are like, we're driving back. I'm not staying in the hotel. I'm like, I'm with you. So we drove back and forth. We drove back that day. And I remember that trip actually very well because you're right. And it's funny because when you start talking hockey stories, they all kind of flow. Something flows, something starts here and it flows into here and it goes to here and here. And these all blend into one another. But yeah, I remember that because you and I were talking. I think we were 2 or 3 coffees deep by then, and it was one of those ones. And I think we spent a lot of time talking, sitting on the bus together and in the hotel together about different stories, about different guys and different things. But those are the things I love to talk about them because I got to experience them. And I'm not someone who's going to go out and flaunt it. Yeah, I played in the NHL. I did this. I don't, to me, that was just a life experience that I got to live. That was a part of my life that was unbelievable, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But, for me, it was more about the people you meet and the people you meet along the way in this game. And, how you and I met, like, geez, we started doing TV together for Rogers TV. And I was just like, who am I doing TV with? Farwell? Okay, whatever. And, going through, and our producer at the time, Chris Schooley, was awesome. And, he kind of walked me through it. Like, I've never done TV or anything like this, but, working with you and working with Chris was great. And that's part of the stories I like to talk about as well, because that's all tied into my hockey stories and my hockey life and all the experiences I've gotten to have because of hockey. And I'm grateful for it. And, I get to watch my boys play, and that brings me as much joy as anything.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that real quick though, Chris. Torch, do you remember the playoff game when a fan brought a sign to the game and held it up to the booth that said, "He's a nice guy"?
Yeah, we were doing Keller Williams, and
right.
It was Keller Williams, and we were doing something, and it became like iconic. Like, people would walk by me in the grocery store and go, "He's a nice guy," and like, we started it out as a joke because you were supposed to read the whole script, and then I just jumped in there one time and I did it, and everyone thought it was hilarious, and it was like, it became like this stupid thing. Like, people were bringing signs at the game for "He's a nice guy," and I'm just like, oh my God, this is crazy. And it really did. It started out as a joke on the broadcast.
That's great. And I'm going to use that moving forward as a throwback. But Mike talked about your guys' ride that one day. I don't think I've ever told you or Mike this, but growing up, me as a kid, obviously watching my 2 uncles play in the OHL for Owen Sound and Guelph, our family hated the Kitchener Rangers. They still do. My grandfather once told me, I hope they lose every game they ever play. I was doing the television broadcast for the team at this time. And you were a big part of that because you were so good. And I remember, like, I had hockey cards and I drew on like devil horns on your helmet. Like, Mike Torchia was public enemy #1 in my house. So when I first got around the Rangers organization and the broadcasting side, going to the game and being like, Torchia is going to be there. I'm like, oh, I hate Torchia. I'm like, I bet you he's a dink, like, and then you meet him for the first time. You're like, I love Mike Torchia.
He's a nice guy.
He's a nice guy.
He's a nice guy. You know what? It's so funny because everyone has this perception of what people are like. We had the best rivalries. Like you mentioned Guelph and Owen Sound. Those were like some of my favorite games to play because we had such a rivalry with Guelph. Like, I remember like almost getting into a fight with Todd Bertuzzi in front of my net. He was a young kid at the time. They had Todd Bertuzzi and Jeff O'Neill when they moved back to Guelph after Hamilton moved back to Guelph. And then the old Guelph team that was in Guelph, you should see when Mike Parsons and I see each other. It's like, I love Mike Parsons. Steve Parsons is the funny one. But Mike Parsons, he can tell you a story. He's got some great stories. I imagine his podcast would have been great with him and Steve, like those two together. Steve, sometimes I can't keep track of Steve. He goes all over the map. But Mike is just an absolute gem of a guy. And he was a guy I did battle with in the net almost on a nightly occasion for 2 years between games between Owen Sound and Kitchener. And, he was a Boston Bruin draft pick and well-deserved, and what a great goalie, but even better person. I love, and that's the part of it that I love. Like, you meet so many people like that, and fantastic guy.
I know we've kept you long enough. I'm sure Mike wants to wrap it up. I know he's got things to do today, but I just want to end on one specific question. You talked about, how everything you've dealt with has just been your story, and now you get to watch your kids go through it. Watching Nathan a couple of years ago put on that Rangers uniform, what was that like for you?
You know what? It was pretty surreal. Like, because we got to the game, and forever grateful for Mike McKenzie for even giving him the opportunity. Nathan, by all means, is a fantastic goalie, but he's not your typical goalie at this time. Like, he's not 6'4", he's not 6'5", he's on the smaller end of the scale for goalies, but he's got that battle, he's got compete, and he's got desire. But he is watching him put on that Ranger jersey and go out there for warm-up and take warm-up. And the first time actually I saw it was in the exhibition game. He played exhibition game against Barrie, and he was fantastic in the game. They ended up winning 5-4 in overtime, I think, but had a great game. And both their goalies, Ingham was gone, and he was just, Mike McKenzie just kind of called him, and Kane TC called him to give him a shot and an opportunity. And he goes, if it was, he got traded from Oshawa to Owen Sound, and Owen Sound, he kind of got a bum deal, never really got an opportunity. Didn't, for some reason, him and Dale DeGray didn't really see eye to eye in the way the game was played. But it wasn't like he had even talked to Dale DeGray. Dale DeGray just didn't like the way he played, so he didn't give him the opportunity. So he kind of been kicked around and everything else. And, he had a great year. He played for Greg Walters in Georgetown the year before, and absolutely had a fantastic year, and absolutely loved Greg Walters. And when Greg Walters left, it was great because there was that mutual respect between them. So he was like, I'm kind of done with the OHL. He goes, I don't even care. I'm just going to go to Georgetown, play my games, and enjoy myself. And then he goes, if anyone else would have called me, he goes, if Mississauga would have called me, or Guelph or anyone else would have called me, he goes, I wouldn't have gone. But because the Kitchener Rangers called me, he goes, that's the only reason I went. And he goes, it was a great experience, something, guys, you know what it's like to be around the Rangers. He goes, first thing he had was a guy like Danny Liebold came in and took him in and brought him in and talked to him and everything else. And, is there anything better than talking to Danny Liebold when, you're coming into the room like, hey, this is Dan Liebold, and been around forever, and probably one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet in this game. And he goes, hey Nate, how's it going? Like, because Nathan had been around. I was a goalie coach with the Rangers. I'd been around as a broadcaster, so Nathan had been in and out of that dressing room with Steve. Steve Spott was his coach in spring hockey one year with Troy Smith was his coach because Steve Spott made him coach. And Steve Spott and Pete DeBoer were on the doors working the doors, and Troy Smith was the head coach. But that's who he played spring hockey with. So he grew up with these guys and be around it. So to be around the Rangers and have that opportunity to do that, there was nothing more my boys liked than coming Friday night and sitting in the booth while Farwell and I did a broadcast and just hanging out there. Andrew just came for the chocolate and peanuts. But
hey, so did you.
That's true too. Actually, I came for the coffee in the media lounge because Farwell used to make me fetch him coffee in between periods because that's all he drank, like 12 coffees a game. But yeah, to see Nathan get that opportunity for the Rangers and put that jersey on, it was pretty surreal and it was pretty special for him. I know that.
What a small world, Torch. The story you told earlier of your former teammate Tyler Ertl when he was in North Bay. Sorry about this in advance. He spears you. Now his kid and your kid are playing down east for another former Kitchener Ranger, Billy McGugan.
Yeah, you know what? Ertz and I were, we gotten to know each other beforehand, but we became pretty close my last year junior when he came back. He was at, I think he was at UW going to school, and we had an overage spot open, and Joe McDonnell convinced him to come back and play as our overager in Kitchener that year. And he came back, and we became really tight. So there's some other stories that probably aren't fit for this podcast that between Tyler and I, but that we became tight then. And then to see our kids grow up, like we both lived here in Baden, and Nathan played with Tyler's oldest boy, Jacob, his very first year of novice here in New Hamburg. And now to see Justin go, and Justin's a heck of a hockey player down there. This is Tyler's middle boy, and his youngest boy is now in Waterloo, who's supposed to play minor midget this year, but ended up practicing as a minor midget all year. So, but to see that, so these boys have known each other. My boys have known Tyler's boys since they were all little babies and 4 years old. We spent New Year's with Tyler one year, and so it's not like it's foreign to them. So they've known each other for years, but to actually play on the same team, it was pretty fun for me to watch. So Tyler and I, we watch it on hockey TV, so we text each other during the game. You see that? I was like, yeah, that was bad. So we're still dads, but we just have to do it over the phone now.
It's awesome stuff. Hey, get back to your life, but save some stories for the sequel. We're going to do this again, okay?
Oh, Michael, anytime. I think there's a few I haven't told yet. So